Hi, I'm Caroline,
And hi, I'm Steve.
and today we're going to continue a conversation that we've had recently where the issue of how mental health is perceived differently between the genders and also the ages. So, Steve is an expert on men's mental health, and I love that you position it as mental wealth because just that slight change in one letter from an H to a W really changes again the perception of how people look at it. So let's start off. Why did you make that change from mental health to mental wealth?
Oh, do you know, because well, firstly, I've been banging the drum for ages that all of us have mental health just as we have physical health.
Yeah.
But what I was hearing was more and more people saying, "Oh, they're off sick today because they've got mental health." Well, we all have all the time,
Mm,
and just the way that those things were positioned just kind of said to me, "Yeah, we've still got a stigma, haven't we? We still don't quite get it." And when you talk about mental health, it conjures up images of suicide and depression and anxiety and darkness and all the sort of down horrible stuff that really that task oriented managers in a performance environment just don't want to talk about. So
mm,
I thought about, and then this phrase came to me through a couple of other people where I saw the word wealth being used instead of health, and I thought, wow, yeah, that's transformative because the industry that I have worked in mostly is about success and creating wealth and being performance driven. And the minute you talk about mental wealth, suddenly you're on the same level as them again. Um, but the association with mental wealth is more about caring and nurturing and support and success and openness and honesty. And
mhm.
so hopefully that explains why I've changed it. But it is genuinely a transformation from one to the other.
Yeah, and it's interesting there. You're talking about openness, honesty, things that I would say are typically more aligned. If you said to someone, which gender is more open and honest, I think you would most people would say women tend to be. You know, we talk about our problems more openly. We're more honest with our feelings. We don't bury them, we express them. So why do you think that's different with men?
Well, as a man, obviously I'm expert in men's mental health coming from my own perspective. But as a man, I think the it comes from a lifetime of conditioning of not being encouraged to open up. In fact, being encouraged to keep your feelings to yourself, keep your emotions to yourself. You know, that whole big boys don't cry kind of thing.
Hmm.
You mentioned the generations. I think again, I'm a Gen X, so we were the sort of, off out you go to play and don't come back to the light, street lights come on sort of generation.
Yeah.
And we had to create our own toughness. And if you went home and you'd fallen over and cut your knee, you'd get a sort of, a run under the tap and a there on the shoulder, and off you go.
Hmm.
Um, and I suppose put all of that together, and our generation and being male as well was kind of encouraged that you just don't open up about this stuff. And what I've noticed is, now as obviously as an adult, is that there's another aspect, particularly in male dominated environments, and especially if one of those environments is a diagnostic or and fix it business, like the car industry or like engineering or like construction or IT or any of those industries where the emphasis is on we have something that creates a problem, we diagnose the problem and we fix it. That feeds perfectly into a man's hunter gatherer kind of mindset.
Yeah.
And what they tend to do is then go, well, if I can't diagnose it and fix it, what's the point of talking about it? It's just something I can't deal with. And I think they apply that same principle when it comes to talking about issues of the heart, which, a lot of mental health is, because it's emotion based. Whereas I think by comparison, when women are in that place, six of them will get together and open a bottle of prosecco until one of them's crying, leaning on the fireplace. But between them, they'll sort it out.
Yeah.
They'll sort it out and they'll support each other. And I think men have traditionally been missing that.
I think it's fascinating. You mentioned about the hunter and gatherer. So, in a lot of the work that I do, working with people sort of quite intensely in a one to one situation, you can see that a lot of the wiring, a lot of the behaviors really still take us back to being cavemen. So if you go back to that, evolution has changed us physically in some ways, but mentally, I don't think we have changed that much.
Yeah.
So men were out there, hunting the deer. And whilst they would go out maybe as a group of them, they wouldn't all be together. They'd be surrounding the deer, and they would have to deal with their problem on their own. Whereas the women were back at the camp, surrounded by other women. And I joke about multitasking. Women can't actually multitask, but what they can do is a lot of things very sequentially, because that's what women were doing. They were
Mm.
tending the fire, they were cooking the meat, they were looking after the kids, they were protecting the camp. So I think we still have an evolutionary difference that even over the millions of years hasn't really changed. That's what we go to when we're under that stress situation.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you say, and even in that scenario of, a group of men going out and hunting a deer, and that's for their survival. There was probably well, I can imagine there was a large element of collaboration there. And I think increasingly we've lost that, and men increasingly feel isolated and feel that they're on their own, and it's a competition. And the modern version of that is four of us will go out and hunt for a deer, and you'll take the shot and miss, and the other three will ridicule that fourth person, and and that fourth person who missed, now starts to feel really bad about themselves and conjures up all the other memories of the past that we talked about previously. But
do you think it is changing though? Because I've certainly seen a change in the profile of clients that I've been working with. If I went back 10 years, the percentage of men that I work with was certainly single figures, probably down below 5%. Whereas increasingly now I am getting males coming to me, and they're not embarrassed about the fact they've got something that's not working in their life and they want to change it.
yeah,
How
I
are you
definitely,
seeing
yeah,
this?
yes, no, I agree. I think there are changes that are happening. And in fact, even in the last few days, I've stumbled across something that's obvious, and that is that a lot of men in male-dominated environments, particularly in management roles, are more task-focused than people-focused.
Mm-hmm.
And I think so. Employers now need to take a bit of a stand in helping people have a bit more people focus, than being just about getting the job done. But I think increasingly, you're right. I think, and certainly as we see, new younger generations coming through, that there is definitely more of a shift towards people being a bit more open and honest.
Now, I know you tend to work predominantly within the automotive sector.
Mm.
I've done a little work in there in previous life myself, so it tends to be again very task focused, very male oriented. What industries, in your view, are getting this not necessarily right, but are doing it better?
Um, I don't know if it's specific to any particular industries, but I do know that there are companies that I know of that are making huge strides in this area. And I think what I would put it down to is, there's a lot of companies doing a lot of work around diversity and inclusion, around gender balance. And I think just in the act of doing that work in the last few years has, excuse me, has created a focus on what level of masculine or feminine energy have we got in our business, and what do we need. And I think what they're doing is actually working on and developing the more feminine traits that are needed, that caring, nurturing, being less hunter-gathererish, if that makes sense. And being more about, no, this is about relationships, it's about collaboration, it's about working together.
Yeah.
And I see some organizations that are much more like that. I mean, you walk past, for example, give them a shout out, but you walk past Google's head office in London, and you can't help but look up and see that the bean bags and the the hair salon and the ping pong tables and the brightly colored rooms and all the rest of it. And you just think, yeah, I'm not sure they've got it 100% right, but they certainly are making huge strides in recognizing that, you know, we're all on the same boat here, and we're all doing, you know, working for the collective good of everyone else. There's no one on a pedestal. There's no one being put out as the hunter gatherers kind of thing. I'm sure they are, but against that backdrop, it's a nice balance of feminine and masculine energy.
Yeah, I think
I almost
the
sound like I know
companies,
what I'm talking about sometimes.
careful. The companies that I've gone into and worked with, there's been things like accountancy companies, telecoms companies.
Mm,
So there is quite a range. I did a lot of work with Imperial, but it tends to be, I see that there is a management recognition that it is about changing the culture of the organization rather than working with people who are struggling with their mental wealth.
yeah,
And one of the things that I do is three very simple techniques that, if everyone starts to apply cumulatively, has a really, really big impact.
yeah.
That is that the sort of thing that you endorse as well? That it's, if everyone takes small steps, that moves the organization one heck of a long way.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I've, you know, I've had about 6 different versions of my LinkedIn profile this year because I'm trying to get it right as to where that message sits. But if I was to say I was an expert in anything, it is in that culture evolution in businesses, and particularly from in seeing the transition of a very male dominated masculine energy diagnostic and fix it business, and watching that go through the pandemic and come out the other side and desperately try to cling on to how things were in the past, but with lots of pressure coming at it from different directions of, well, no, you've got different generations now, and actually people think differently, and well-being is more at the top of the agenda than it was. And you know, so as a result, what we need to think about is, well, what does that culture look like um,
Mhm.
going forward? And if we've got managers and leaders who are very, very task oriented and task focused, then we've got some work to do in helping them to have, you know, the competencies of mental wealth.
Yeah. One of the tips that time and time again people come up with to say, wow, that is so simple, but it really works. I call it flip it. So we will often say, what if? What if I don't get that client? What if I, muck up my words? And what your brain naturally does is then catastrophize. It answers that question. Well, if I muck up my words, I'll be look like a complete prat. Then my boss is gonna, not like me. I won't get promoted. I'll lose my job. And suddenly you're out on the street through nothing more than a what if thought. And flip it is just simply about doing the opposite. It's very hard to do on your own. But if you said to me, Steve, Caroline, what if I don't get the next contract? And I said, what if you do?
Mm.
Your brain will answer that as well. And it just sends off on a completely different track.
Yeah.
So that's one of the tips that I go in and teach people in companies is, if you hear a colleague say, what if, just flip it.
Mm.
And it changes that energy straight away. So
Mm.
what's one of the tips that you share in the organizations that you go into that, again, just starts that change in culture and an embodiment of supporting each other?
Well, the first thing I do is do a bit of a list of, you know, when you think of mental health, what are the words that you come up with? And that's where I say they come up with darkness, you know, depression, anxiety, stress, suicide, even. And compare that with, well, what are the words that you think of when you think about mental wealth? And that's more about nurturing and caring and growth and success and all that stuff that the business is aimed at. And so that then the question is, right, well, how do you get from there to there?
Mm-hmm.
And I've got one simple little tool that I use that was developed for the motor trade because it hopefully resonates. And that is to, let's transform that "how are you" question, which typically no one they don't really want to know the answer to that. You're just asking because it's the polite thing to do. But if you do get an answer, 9 times out of 10, it's, oh, I'm all right, or it's not me, or it's same shit, different day, or whatever it might be. So let's transform that question into more of something that's more relevant. So we use a rev counter, a car rev counter, for example, that talks about, you know, if you're running your engine properly, your engine's running at a nice 2.5, 3,000 revs, you increase the pressure and those revs go up. So it's the only time that a scale out of 10 is bad, when the number goes higher.
Mm.
And so, using that example, if you were to say to someone, how are you revving today? And their response is, oh, I'm at about a 7 or an 8. Oh, really? Do you want to tell me about that? Just those two things there is hopefully going to open up a bit more of a conversation than saying to them, how are you? Which is going to get the response, oh, yeah, I'm all right, which
Mm.
was generally the natural response. And then on the back of that, what the tip that we give them is include that in your one-to-one reviews. How many of your reviews are really, or designed around the performance of the business, and are a bit like driving whilst looking in the rearview mirror?
Yeah.
Because you're only looking behind you. So think about someone's well-being and put that in early on, and then create what I call a shoulder-to-shoulder ethos in a business, because those are the best times to have these conversations. Is not when you're staring at somebody face to face, but actually when you're stood next to them, shoulder to shoulder. So whether that's walking down
Yeah.
the street, or walking in a park, sitting next to them,
In a
watching
car.
something on a TV, or sitting next to them
Mm.
in the car, whatever it might be.
Yeah. Yeah.
So those are a couple of tips that I share that I think are landing reasonably well.
Yeah, perfect. Well, I know we could carry on having all this conversation forever, so it might be time to call it for a halt now, and we'll pick up another time.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Caroline. See you soon.
Pleasure. See you soon too. Bye.